Poff here, author of multiple books for weavers of the rigid Heddle loom. I've had a number of readers lately write to me with questions about using pickup sticks. Then I had a weaver recently ask me about log cabin and my pillars and hedgerows pattern from my first book, Woven Style for the 15-inch rigid Heddle loom. I thought this would be a great time to address both questions using that pattern. This one lends a challenge to the weaver because we combine alternating colors, shifting the order of colors, and then I dress it up with a little pickup pattern in between. I use a few tricks to warp the loom directly for this, and it's also my go-to warping method for when I want to make color changes with an odd number of ends. So let's do this, and by the way, hang on to the end and I'll tell you how to get the pattern for free. Rayon, like the champagne color of interlacement zigzag that I've chosen here, is a great option. I'm using Dragon Tail Rayon Boucle for the black because I had it on hand, but zigzag in black is a very compatible choice as well. Now, a few of you own warping boards, especially if you're a floor loom weaver, but I know many of you don't have one of these. But if you do have mobility issues where you're challenged to go from the loom to the peg, or some serious space issues, you may want to get familiar with your warping board. We'll cover that another time. With direct warping, you normally are working with even numbers because you start with pulling loops that are 2 strands, and they're usually slayed next to each other. We have to get a little bit tricky to shake that up when we want to place intervals of a color to get an odd number of ends. To make log cabin happen, we start with one color, in this case black, in the holes, and a different color, champagne, in the slots to make the first section of logs. That means we're alternating single colors, and 1 is an odd number, right? This is a diagram to represent the holes and slots of your reed as you face the back of the loom to draw loops. I'm right-handed, so I'll start on the right. If you're left-handed, you may want to start drawing loops at the left side of your loom, reading from the left of the chart. The short vertical lines are loops going into slots, and the long lines are loops going into holes. That first gold-colored loop that has a red star over the top, the written instructions note that this one will be a single strand. I've tied my 2 colors onto the back apron rod, set my warp distance, and measured to my starting point. The pattern says to warp 10 5/8 inches wide. Divided in half, this rounds to starting about 5 1/4 inches away from the center mark. To draw that single strand, I'll draw the first loop through a slot, as the pattern indicates. But when I get down here to the peg, it's a single strand. So I'm going to cut the end and tie it off to the peg. By the way, doesn't everybody keep a warping peg permanently mounted to an end table in their living room? This is part of my program to eliminate all barriers to start warping. Now, if you look at the pattern, by the way, we're going to pull that cut end through and tie it back onto the apron rod because we'll be using that again. As you look at the pattern, the next loop, double strand loop, goes through a hole, and we're required to skip a hole and a slot. Now, this may look more subtle on your reed as you're looking at it than it does on the chart that I've drawn. Just count hole, slot, and go into the next hole and draw a loop. Now the next loop of the champagne color, if you look at the chart, is supposed to go in the slot that's adjacent to that hole loop we just drew. Now, crossing colors. When you're crossing 2 different yarns across, you don't need to cut and tie off that color or that varied yarn if you're crossing just 1 loop. But I strongly advise, if you're crossing more than 1 loop, cut that color and tie on again as many times as you need to avoid excess crossing. So the next loop is black, and again, we're going to skip a hole and a slot and place that black in a hole. Champagne color in the adjacent slot. Skipping forward just a little, I've now warped up to that box on the chart that's outlined in bold. This is where the first color shift happens. This is simply the same action as we've done so far, but here we change to champagne in the holes and black in the slots. So I now will place, if you notice, skip a hole in a slot, two of the same colors side by side. And black will go in the adjacent slot. Now, I'm breaking my rule here. I'm not cutting and tying off, and I am crossing two loops with the black. Don't tell anybody. Really, since this is only intermittent, not consistently happening, and you'll see when I slay the reed, there's not a lot of crossing up and down. We can get away with that. Also notice that I've tightened up and neatened up a little bit on our slacking warp here as I progressed. Now remember, you're only measuring in this step and you're not tensioning. Tensioning comes later, so pulling tightly at this stage does more harm than good, so keep it loose. This box in bold has another color shift in the middle, so now you know how to deal with that when you get there. Complete everything in that box in that exact sequence 3 times over, and you have drawn all your loops across, cut and tied your 2 colors at the end, neatened everything up. I recommend that you check every couple inches as you're drawing these loops to make sure you're on target with your pattern. One easy way to do that is to make sure that every hole that you filled has an empty Heddle hole between it, and that your holes are 3 black, 3 of the champagne, 3 of the black, and so on. Okay, I'm now slaying the reed. This part's easy. We've wound on and packed our warp as usual. All we have to do now is slay left. Hole threads go in the empty hole to the left. Just pick one out of the pair. Slay it through. As we work, I find it easier to throw hole threads up and over the reed and leave slot threads low. Slot threads go in the empty slot to the left. So I have tied my warp onto the front with bows, woven a scrap header. Sometimes I use my weaving yarn for my header to test color. I've wound 2 shuttles, B with black and A with the champagne color. I'm going to start with B up and on the right and throw a pick. I'm going to tuck the tail into the same shed. So before I change the shed, I'll wrap it around the outermost warp thread and tuck it in for trimming later on. Then I change the shed, and I'm going to start color A on the left side in the down shed, and I will do the same tail tucking before I change that shed by wrapping around the outermost warp thread on that left side. Now I just alternate color in plain weave. Simple, right? When you have 2 colors on the same side, you're going to wonder how to wrap them so they go effectively into the shed. I have this thing I jokingly call my under, over, over. And what I mean is, if the last color that I threw is sitting over the outermost warp thread, then I'm going to wrap the next shuttle over the resting thread. Makes a nice edge. Now we've completed the first section, and we have 6 repeats of black and champagne. I'll call these logs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I want to turn these and make it look like the logs are perpendicular to my first section, how do we do that? Very simple. We just weave 2 of the same color consecutively. Now, when you are weaving with alternating colors, it's kind of easy to forget to change your shed. And if you do that, your pattern will start to look funny, so you'll have to back up and correct it. But here's a little tip. If you are in a section where A color is in the up shed, your B color is in the down shed, it'll be the same throughout that section. So A in the up shed, B in the down shed, and you can see our logs have begun to turn. So here's the part where we get to the pickup sticks. Now you can keep going with log cabin, and that'll be great. Or you can jazz it up a little like we're going to do right now. Pickup sticks have many uses, but we're going to focus on its use to create weft floats in our pattern. So when you do weft floats, or warp floats, any kind of floats, you want to start setting the pickup stick with the reed in the down position. That's because we want to engage only with slot threads, not hole threads. So we put the hole threads down. Before we do this, let's open up this back shed. You have a shed in the front that you weave in, you have a shed in the back, and sometimes a little bit of crossing inhibits a nice clean opening back here. So let's just open that up. And the way we set the pickup stick for this purpose is to pick up, looking only at the top row, the first one, the third one, the fifth one. We want to pick up every other warp thread behind the reed here. And once we get all the way across, picking up with our beveled edge, we're going to push this warp stick all the way to the back beam. Won't cause any trouble there because most of what we're going to do is still going to be plain weave. When we want to make a special row, we'll use the pickup stick. So looking at the pattern, our next row is that special row. It says to do a pickup, and we're going to pull the stick forward with the reed in neutral, place the stick up against the back of the reed, and you've got a special shed in which we're going to throw color A. Then the pattern says, by the way, don't forget to move the pickup stick out of the way or you won't be able to move your reed. Give it a beat, and we're going to throw a pick of black according to the pattern. Now this time our weft thread sits underneath the outermost warp thread. So remember how we do this? We wrap the next color underneath that thread. Give it a beat. We're going to do another special row here with A. So we're repeating this sequence 2 times. And up with color B. See how we can use the pick we just threw, that thread, to set our edge. Give it a beat. Now the pattern says down with A. And up with B. Another down A. Got to repeat that twice. And up B. Now you see our pillars pattern emerging here. So I jumped ahead a little bit so you can see one full repeat of our pattern between my fingers. We got a lot going on here. How are you going to keep track of all that? Well, I've got a chart for you. I show the pattern chart here, which is read from top to bottom as you repeat each sequence. Then I have 11 repeats if you're doing the full scarf. And you'll notice that I've pointed out that we end on repeat number 1 on the 11th time through. We all know in real life we get interruptions. Very few of us get a chance to weave for a couple hours at a time. So you're going to have moments when you stop in this intricate pattern and you're going to want to figure out where you left off. So let's revisit our weaving mantra. In my house, people are used to hearing me talk to myself. So as I'm weaving this, I am saying up with B, down with A. Look to the left. Section 1 says you repeat that sequence 6 times. Continuing on, section 2, I repeat to myself up A, down B. Again, you see you can repeat that 6 times. When I get to section 3, I mix it up a little. Pick up with A, up, B. That gets repeated 2 times, and so on. Oh, the phone rang. I just finished the first part of section 3, the pick up and the up sequence 2 times. I'm going to need to mark my spot so I know where I left off. Now you can see how you use this thing. When I go back to weave again, I know I've completed the first part of section 3, and I'll start with down with A, up B, and so on. No discussion of float patterns is complete without talking about managing edges. Every once in a while, you'll throw a pick and find out that you did not catch the outermost threads. It can happen at the beginning or at the end of a special row on your float pattern. So when you see that happen, all you got to do is remember to go around the outermost thread so that it catches. It doesn't happen a lot in this pattern because we're usually wrapping 2 colors. You'll see it happen when a color is next to itself. So this one takes a little bit of focus, but it's fun to build a pattern in this way. So here we are off the loom. I've made this one a cowl length by doing 4 repeats less. Note that the pattern on the front that you saw as you were weaving, that's shown at left here, is different than the contrasting pattern that was on the back when you were weaving. It's displayed on the right. I hope this helps you add to your rigid Heddle results. I've updated the pattern to coordinate with this video. And you can get the full pattern for free, along with links to find out more about my books at poffstudio.com. Also, subscribe to my channel for the next video where we'll focus on secrets of the pickup stick.